is motivated on the basis of their theology to behave in ways that would otherwise be unthinkable. I mean, it takes some ideas to get someone who has economic opportunity, who has the benefit of an education, who has not been molested by occupying powers, and get him to think that the best use of his time is to hijack a plane and hit the wall at 400 miles an hour. I mean, if this were coming, if this kind of violence were coming by and large from the poorest of the poor, the most desperate, the most abused, then those variables would be far more salient. But it's not, and there are a variety of studies that bear this out. But what is interesting to me is the way in which your sophistication, your willingness to have a conception of religion and a conception of faith that is almost infinitely elastic, that is compatible with kind of any mode of discourse, a conception which never allows us to call a spade, is giving shelter to this kind of religious literalism. I have never for a moment believed, and I have never argued, that all bad things, all conflict, comes out of religion. I don't even know if most does. I think probably most wars have been fought for reasons other than religious ideology. But the larger issue is dogmatism. The larger issue is belief without sufficient evidence, belief that is intrinsically divisive because it is immune to criticism, it is immune to the normal tests of conversation, tests of reasonableness, and these beliefs that divide us into these separate moral communities where we have Christians against Muslims against Jews, or blacks against whites, or one nation against another nation based on nationalism. I think nationalism can be incredibly corrosive of everything we want to encourage in civilization. Dogmatism and ideology immune to criticism is a problem. The problem, however, is that only in religion do we put a veneer of sanctity over dogmatism and call it faith, and once called faith, it becomes a apparently necessary and redeeming and precious part of the human experience. I don't think it is, and I think we can have our ethics and have our spiritual experience, indeed even become mystics, without ever presupposing anything on insufficient evidence and without ever lying to ourselves and other human beings about what we know to be true.
Sam, I want to hold you to a close scrutiny of this phrase, which I think is a real shocker, and you must have intended it to be a shocker. Most Muslims are utterly deranged by their religious faith. I've even heard you back off a little bit now. You went from most to some significant subset.
Well, no, let me just make it clear. I'm not backing off of that, because utterly deranged by the... I mean, I set the bar rather low for utter derangement. I mean, by my lights, thinking that the Quran is the best book ever written on any subject, really, is getting you pretty close to derangement. Thinking that that someone should be killed for criticizing it, or that it's a real problem that cartoonists caricature the Prophet Muhammad and they should be kidnapped. That this is the kind of treading upon the sanctities of the religion is a real social problem that demands more energy in its criticism than suicide bombing. That, I think, is a kind of derangement that is immensely widespread, and we shouldn't minimize it. The thing, however, the thing I don't know, and which is a place where I think Reza and I will actually have a meeting of the minds, is I don't know. I mean, it's perfectly clear to me that my style of conversation is not what can be broadcast to the Muslim world to change people's minds. I mean, that is your job. You are much better suited for that job. And I would agree with you that in order to empower the moderates of the Muslim world, drawing cartoons of the Prophet and writing paragraphs of the sort I've written is not a strategy. I'm not a diplomat. And I don't know, but what's troubling me is I don't know where the line is between encouraging moderation, representing what Islam could be. Islam could be a religion of peace, perhaps. Jihad could be just an inner spiritual struggle and have nothing to do with holy war. Indeed, that we have to raise a generation of Muslims who believe those things. But pretending that it is already is problematic, because it isn't for so many millions of Muslims. And it may be that if you pretend hard enough, in fact, you become what you pretend to be. And maybe that's part of the process. But I think we have to admit to ourselves that we are confronting the behavior of a death cult among millions and millions of Muslims, not 10,000 who went to training camps in Afghanistan. We are confronting an endorsement of this kind of behavior and a reflexive political solidarity where Muslims side with other Muslims, no matter how sociopathic their behavior, simply because they're other Muslims. We can't deny the problem while trying to encourage a more benign face of the religion.
I completely understand where you're coming from, Sam, and I certainly, as we've talked in our many other conversations, do respect your intellectualism. But there's a reason why I don't write books about neuroscience, because I don't have an expertise in neuroscience. I write books about what's going on in the Muslim world because I have an expertise in what's going on in the Muslim world. I actually travel through the Muslim world. I study the Muslim world. I understand the conversations that are taking place. And so I feel like, in a sense, I'm in a better position to sort of make judgments about what sort of socio or religious or political developments are taking place within this people of 1.5 billion number. Statements like there are millions of Muslims who have this sort of death cult are profoundly inaccurate and are based on nothing except your sort of general impression of a region and of a religion that you have a very surface understanding of.
Well, it's not. For instance, in the End of Faith, I cite these Pew polls that were done in 9 Muslim countries, actually not the most radicalized. I mean, the most radicalized countries wouldn't let the polling be done. But even in Turkey, the Muslim success story on many fronts, the level of support for suicide bombing against non-combatants in defense of the faith was shocking. I mean, you just run the numbers. When 77% of people in Lebanon say that it is justified, that's, it's not a minority. It's not even close to a minority. Even if it were only 5% of the Muslim world that was radicalized by my lights, that is still a problem we have to talk about soberly. I mean, we're talking about 75 million people.
Certainly, and I don't think anybody would say that that's not a conversation that we need to talk about. But
it's a civilizational problem that is not amenable to simply saying that Islam is a religion of peace.
I don't understand what Islamic civilization means. I mean, I don't.
I'm talking about the global civilization.
Oh, I see. I think, look, the issue here, of course, as you mentioned before, is how do you go about addressing a very serious problem that is taking place, not just in the Muslim world, but throughout the world. I mean, both of those comments that the difference between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is that Judaism and Christianity have gone through some sort of reform, and so that it's tempered its violent aspects, and Islam hasn't. Both of those statements are false. I don't find any kind of tempering in the extremism with which Christianity or Judaism deals with the issue. The sole, or not sole, but certainly the most significant factor in the way that one understands one's religion, the way one interprets one's religion, is not what the religion itself, it's your social context. So we apparently forgot about the 80s and the movement of liberation theology in Latin America, a very Catholic, deeply Christian conception of Jesus as warrior, in which priests themselves were forced to take up arms in the name of the liberator Jesus. And murder opponents in that sense.